I need to start by telling you something that took me a long time to admit to myself. For 14 months I went home every single day and convinced myself that what was happening to me was normal. That is what daily humiliation does to you. It doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives in small enough doses that you spend more energy questioning your own perception than questioning the person doing it. It took me 14 months to stop questioning myself, and 3 months after that it took down an entire department, not just my boss. The whole system he had built around himself, the culture he had created, the silence he had enforced, all of it, exposed, formally, permanently. And I want to be honest with you about something before we go any further. I did not set out to take down a culture. I set out to survive one. The taking down happened because I refused to stop writing things down. That is the whole story, really. A person, a notebook, and the decision, made quietly on a bad Tuesday in March, to treat what was happening as something worth documenting rather than something to simply endure. Let me tell you about that Tuesday, because every story like this has one moment where something shifts, one moment where the person stops absorbing and starts observing. Mine was a Tuesday. I had been at Holloway Group for just over a year, Chicago, Illinois. Mid-size corporate operations and advisory firm. The kind of company that had strong values written on the wall of the reception area and a management culture that had never read them. My boss was a man I will call Raymond Briggs, 48 years old, 13 years at Holloway. The kind of person who had built an entire professional identity around being the most important person in every room he entered. Raymond was not stupid. I want to be clear about that. Stupid people are easier to deal with because their damage is uncoordinated. Raymond's damage was precise, deliberate, engineered with the specific knowledge of what would land and where. He knew exactly which comment would make someone doubt their own competence. He knew exactly which meeting to choose for a correction that could have been made privately. He knew exactly how to frame a piece of feedback so that it felt like concern while functioning as humiliation. And he had been doing it for 13 years, inside a company that had never once formally questioned it. The Tuesday I am talking about was March 15th, 2021, a team meeting. 11 people in the room. A client strategy session that I had spent 2 weeks preparing for. I had built a full competitive analysis, 64 slides, primary research, secondary research, 3 scenario models with financial projections attached. I had worked on it every evening for 2 weeks, and I was proud of it in the specific way you are proud of something when you know it represents your best work. Raymond let me present for 4 minutes, 4 minutes out of the 45 I had prepared for. And then he interrupted me, not with a question, not with a redirect, but with a comment directed not at my work, but at me. He said, in front of 10 colleagues, and with the specific calm of someone who has done this so many times, it no longer requires effort. I think what we are seeing here is a fundamental gap between effort and insight. Working hard and thinking well are not the same thing. The room went quiet. That specific quiet that has texture, that you can feel on your skin. I stopped presenting. I looked at him. I said, "Should I continue?" He said, "I think we've seen enough for now." And he moved on. I sat in that room for the remaining 40 minutes of the meeting, and I did not hear a single word that was said. I was somewhere else entirely, not crying, not angry yet, just somewhere else. I drove home that evening, and I sat in my car in the underground parking garage of my apartment building for a long time. And something happened in that car that I did not expect. Instead of feeling broken, I felt clear. Clear in the way you feel when you have been confused about something for a long time, and suddenly you are not confused anymore. I was not the problem. I had never been the problem, and I was going to prove it. I went upstairs. I opened my laptop. I created a new document. I typed the date, March 15th, 2021, and I wrote down exactly what had happened. Every word Raymond had said, every person in the room, the time, the context, the work I had prepared. The 4 minutes he had given it before the comment that had nothing to do with the work and everything to do with the person who had produced it. I called the document simply Record. I did not know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed it to exist somewhere outside of my own memory. Because memory is subjective and deniable, and Raymond Briggs had spent 13 years making people feel like their memories of what he had done were unreliable. I was going to have something he could not make unreliable. The next morning, I went back to work. I smiled at the right moments. I contributed in meetings. I delivered my projects on time, and to a standard I refused to let Raymond's comment touch. And every evening, without exception, I opened the record and I wrote. Some days there was nothing to add. Good days. Days when Raymond was performing the version of himself that had survived 13 years. The reasonable, experienced manager who gave useful feedback and ran efficient meetings. I documented those too. Not because they were useful to the case I was building, but because I needed the full picture. Not a document of grievances, a document of reality. Other days there was a great deal to add. April 3rd. Raymond dismissed a junior analyst's quarterly report in a client call while the client was present, as not quite at the level we'd normally share externally. The analyst had been told by Raymond himself 2 days earlier to prepare that exact report for the client. April 17th. Raymond presented a market entry framework to the managing director that I had built over 3 weeks and sent to him for review. He did not attribute it. When the managing director asked who had led the analysis, Raymond said, "It was a team effort I've been guiding. I was the team." There was no guiding. May 6th, Raymond told a colleague named James in a performance check-in, which I was present for as the note-taker, that his ceiling at this firm is probably middle management. James had been at Holloway for 18 months. He was 27 years old. He left the company 6 weeks later. I documented all of it, every incident, in the same format: date, setting, people present, exact words where I had them, observable impact, supporting evidence where it existed. By June the record was 19 pages long. By August it was 28. By October, when I began to understand that I was not just documenting for myself, but building something that had a larger purpose, it was 34 pages and growing. Let me tell you about the moment I understood the larger purpose, because it changed how I approached everything after. In September 2021, a woman named Claire joined our team as a senior analyst, sharp, experienced, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately raises the quality of the conversation. I watched Raymond assess her in the first week. I had learned by then to read him, the specific way his eyes moved when he was deciding what category to put someone in, what use they were to him, what threat they represented. Claire represented a threat. She was better than he wanted anyone on his team to be. And I watched him begin, within her first 2 weeks, to do to her exactly what he had been doing to me for a year. The small corrections in front of others, the interrupted presentations, the feedback that sounded like mentorship and functioned like erosion. And I thought, she is starting from zero. She doesn't know yet what she is inside. She is going to spend the next 6 months doing what I did. Questioning herself, absorbing it, trying to adjust, trying to improve, trying to figure out what she is doing wrong. She is not doing anything wrong. I met Claire for coffee on a Thursday evening in October. I did not tell her about the record yet. I just asked how she was finding the team. She said, very carefully, very diplomatically, that she was still getting a read on the management style. I told her, just as carefully, that I had been keeping notes, that I had been documenting things since March, that if she ever experienced something she wanted to talk through, I was available. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "How long have you been doing this?" I told her. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I think I need to start doing that too." She did. From that Thursday forward, Claire kept her own record, her own document, her own dated, witnessed, specific account of what Raymond Briggs did inside a company that had never formally looked at him clearly. 2 records, 2 people, building in parallel. Neither of us knowing yet exactly what we were building toward, but both of us feeling, with increasing certainty, that we were building towards something. In November I was approached by a recruiter. I had not been looking, but when the role was described, I listened. A senior advisory position at a firm whose culture I researched carefully before expressing interest. 3 conversations with people who had worked there, 2 with people who had left. The picture was consistent and it was good. I decided to pursue it. Not because I had given up on Holloway, but because I had understood by then that my future was not going to be built inside a system Raymond Briggs controlled, and that leaving was not defeat, it was strategy, but I was not going to leave quietly. I had 34 pages that said something needed to happen, and Claire had her own record that said the same thing, and somewhere in the building, I suspected, there were others who had been saying it silently for years. I received the offer in December. I accepted on a Tuesday, and I began planning the exit that I had been, without quite realizing it, preparing for since March. I requested a formal written exit interview. I emailed the HR director, a man named Paul Weston, directly. I told him I had a substantial written submission and that I would need the process to accommodate a document of significant length. Paul Weston replied the same afternoon. He said he would make time for whatever I needed. I spent my final 3 weeks organizing the record. 37 pages of documented incidents. 14 months of reality, dated, witnessed, specific, and supported by 11 exhibits. Emails. Time-stamped documents. Meeting minutes I had been authorized to produce that contained language which, in context, told a story nobody had ever read as a complete narrative. Claire submitted her own documentation separately. Her record covered 3 months, 12 incidents, all consistent with the pattern I had documented across 14. 2 people, 2 records, 1 pattern, irrefutable. I submitted my document on my second-to-last day, printed, bound, emailed with read receipt. Paul Weston acknowledged receipt at 5:12 p.m. I watched the notification arrive and felt something I hadn't felt in 14 months. Completion. My last day was a Friday. I finished every handover. I said goodbye to the colleagues I cared about, and there were several, because not everything about those 14 months was Raymond Briggs. Some of it was genuinely good work done with genuinely good people, under genuinely difficult circumstances. I did not say goodbye to Raymond. He was in his office. The door was open. I walked past it. I did not slow down. Monday was my first day at the new firm. Tuesday, I received an email from Paul Weston. The submission had been reviewed over the weekend by himself and the Chief People Officer. An external investigator had been retained. A formal investigation had been opened. I read that sentence 4 times. An external investigator had been retained. They had not just opened an internal review, they had brought in outside counsel, which meant they understood from the first read that what they were dealing with was not a single complaint from a departing employee. It was a structural problem. The investigation ran for 4 weeks. I was interviewed twice, once by video call, once by phone. Claire was interviewed 3 times. 11 other current and former Holloway employees were contacted. 11. I had not known there were 11 others with accounts to give. I had suspected, but suspicion and confirmation are different things. 11 people, across multiple years, across multiple team configurations, all describing variations of the same pattern. It was not a management style, it was a culture. Raymond Briggs had not just been humiliating individuals, he had been building an environment in which humiliation was the primary management tool. Credit was currency controlled by one person, and the cost of speaking up was made to feel higher than the cost of staying quiet. That culture had been running, largely unchallenged, for 13 years. The investigation concluded on a Thursday. Paul Weston called me personally that afternoon. The review was complete. The findings were significant. The company would be taking comprehensive action, not just regarding one individual, but regarding the team's structure, culture, and management oversight processes. Comprehensive action. Those words landed differently than I expected. I had gone into this expecting one outcome, Raymond Briggs being held accountable. What actually happened was larger than that. Raymond Briggs was terminated, effective immediately. His access was revoked on a Thursday morning, and by afternoon his office was being cleared. But that was not all. Holloway commissioned an independent culture audit of the entire operations division. Every manager, every team, every reporting structure examined against the same standards the investigation had applied to Raymond's team. What that audit found, I heard through Claire, who had stayed at Holloway and was part of the process, was not just one problem. It was a system. Raymond had been the most visible expression of a management philosophy that rewarded domination and punished transparency. He was the worst of it. But he was not the only one. 3 other managers were disciplined as part of the audit findings. 1 was terminated. 2 were placed on formal performance improvement plans with external management coaches assigned. The company restructured its entire HR complaint process. Anonymous reporting channels were introduced. Exit interviews were reformatted as formal written submissions by default, not optional. A culture committee was established with external oversight. All of it from a document that had started as one person writing down what happened on March 15, 2021, because they needed it to exist somewhere outside their own memory. I think about that a lot. How much came from how little? How a decision made in a parking garage on a bad Tuesday evening to start writing instead of enduring became the thread that unraveled a 13-year culture of institutional harm. I want to talk about something people rarely discuss in stories like this: the loneliness of building the record. Because it was lonely for the first 7 months, before Claire, before the coffee conversation, before I knew there were others. It was just me, alone with a document that I wasn't sure anyone would ever read, writing into a silence that felt enormous. There were nights I thought about deleting it, not because I was afraid of the consequences, but because maintaining it required me to stay present to something I desperately wanted to stop thinking about. Writing the incidents down meant reliving them. And reliving them, even in the disciplined clinical language I had chosen, cost something every time. I kept writing anyway, not because I was certain it would work, because I was certain that not writing was the only guaranteed way it wouldn't. That distinction between uncertainty and guaranteed failure was what kept the document alive on the nights I wanted to close it permanently. I also want to talk about the moment I told Claire, because that moment changed the shape of everything. Before Claire, I was one person with a record. After Claire, I was part of something. 2 people who had separately experienced the same thing and had separately decided to document it were now, together, something that the organization would eventually have to take seriously in a way that it might have been able to dismiss one person's account. This is important practical knowledge. If you are documenting a toxic environment and you suspect you are not alone, find the person, not to organize a campaign, not to coordinate your stories, just to have the conversation that tells each of you you are not imagining this. And perhaps, if you are both willing to submit your accounts separately but simultaneously so that the pattern is visible to the people receiving them. Patterns are what investigations are built on. One incident is a complaint. 12 incidents across 2 people over 14 months is a pattern. And a pattern, documented specifically, submitted formally, with witnesses named, is something a professionally functioning organization cannot look at and file away. I want to give you the practical framework now. Because this story is not just mine, and I know that. Versions of this are happening right now, and the people inside them deserve something concrete. Start today. Open the document tonight. Don't wait until you have decided to leave. Don't wait until something big enough happens to feel worth documenting. Start with today. Even if today was a medium day, even if what happened was small, start. Format it the same way every time. Date, location, who was present, what was said or done, what the impact was, what evidence exists. Keep the language factual. Keep the emotion out of the document, not out of yourself, just out of the document. Date everything. This sounds obvious and people still don't do it. The date is what turns an incident into a data point. A data point is what turns a feeling into evidence. Evidence is what turns a complaint into something an organization must act on. Include the witnesses, every person who was present. Their presence is part of the record regardless of whether they ever formally confirm it. And when investigators come, and if your document is thorough enough, they will come, those witnesses may be contacted, and what they say independently will either confirm or challenge what you documented. If you document it accurately, they will confirm it. Attach the evidence, every email, every Slack message, every document with a timestamp that supports what you have written. You will not have evidence for everything, but for the things you do, attach it. Each exhibit transforms a claim into a fact. Find the others, carefully, without pressure. A conversation over coffee that says, "I have been keeping notes. If you ever want to talk about your experience, I am here." That is enough. Let them decide. Let their documentation be their own. But let them know that the option exists. Research your company's formal complaint process. Understand what a written submission triggers. Understand the difference between an informal conversation and a formal document. Submit formally. Name it formally. Address it to the most senior HR person available. And keep a copy of everything you submit. When you submit everything, not a summary, the full document, the exhibits, the pattern. Because the person reading it needs to understand not just what happened, but how often, to whom, across what period of time, and with what organizational impact. That is the document that cannot be dismissed. That is the document that gets an external investigator retained on a weekend. And here is the thing I most want you to hear. You may not see the full outcome. I left before the culture audit was commissioned. I learned about the 3 other managers and the restructured complaint process and the culture committee through Claire months after I had moved on. The outcome of what I built was larger than anything I witnessed directly. That is okay. That is actually the point. You are not doing this to witness the ending. You are doing this to make the ending possible. For you, for the person who is already there behind you. For the person who hasn't joined yet and doesn't know what they are walking into. Your documentation is not just your protection, it is theirs. Raymond Briggs spent 13 years inside a company that had never been shown, clearly, specifically in writing, with exhibits attached, what he was doing, not because no one knew, but because everyone who knew had left quietly, each departure taking their knowledge with them. Each quiet exit, leaving the pattern intact for the next arrival. I was not willing to be another quiet exit, and Claire was not willing to be one either. And when 2 people decide that simultaneously and document it with the discipline of people who understand that feelings need to become facts before organizations will act on them, something happens that 17 quiet exits could not produce, something real, something formal. Something that changes the structure, not just the personnel. Something that makes the company look at itself, not just at one manager, and ask how this was possible for 13 years, and what needs to be different, so that it cannot be possible again. That question, asked officially, funded externally, resulting in policy change, is worth more than any individual termination, because terminations replace people. Culture audits replace systems, and systems are what produce the next Raymond Briggs if you leave them intact. So here is what I want to leave you with tonight. You are sitting somewhere right now reading this, and some of you, I know this, I feel it, are in the middle of it. You are going home every day and convincing yourself it is normal because that is what daily humiliation does. It normalizes itself. It makes you the variable rather than the environment. You are not the variable. The environment is. Open the document. Write the date. Write what happened today. Write it in the language of a professional assessment, not a diary, not a complaint, a record. And come back tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that for as long as you need to. Because here is what I know from the other side of it. The document will feel pointless some nights. It will feel like shouting into a room where no one is listening. It will feel like the most disciplined, thankless, invisible work you have ever done. And then one day you will place it on the right desk, and someone will read it over a weekend, and on Monday morning the phone will ring, or the email will arrive, and it will say, "A formal investigation has been opened." And everything you built in silence, every date, every name, every carefully written incident, every exhibit attached at 11 p.m. on a night when you were exhausted and sad and not sure any of it would ever matter, will have been exactly enough, not almost enough, exactly enough. Because you built it with precision. Because you kept going when you wanted to stop, because you treated the truth like something worth protecting, even on the nights when it felt like no one else did.